The date today is 2/22/21, and this is the action-packed episode 79 of the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Paperback Warrior Podcast. My name is Eric and I'm here with my co-host Tom, and every week we discuss old paperbacks from the 20th century from a reader's perspective. We have a blog at paperbackwarrior.com where Tom and I review these old books with these vivid covers from every genre you can imagine. On the show we go beyond the reviews to tell you about how these books got made and the authors who brought them to life. Let me throw it over to Tom to talk about this episode. Tom, you with us?
Yes, thanks, Eric. On today's episode, we have a feature on prolific author Edward S. Ahrens, best known for his Sam Durrell series of spy adventures, commonly known as the Assignment series. But as you'll hear, his career spanned way more than just those paperbacks. I'm also going to tell you the story behind the creation of a Harry Whittington book called Like Mink, Like Murder, which I'll also be reviewing. Eric, what is your review this week?
If we have time this week, I'm going to review Nightmare by Ahrens to tie in with the feature this week.
All right, cool. Before we launch into all that, I need to share with you what has arrived in the mail this month. Eric, have you seen this? Let me hand this over to you.
I not only have seen it, I purchased a copy and I own it.
Yeah, I had to buy a copy myself. What we're talking about here is the 12th installment of Men of Violence, a fanzine for vintage men's adventure paperback fans, produced by our friend Justin Marriott over in Great Britain. As usual, the episode is just filled with stuff custom-made for guys like us. The cover story is about the legacy of Manor Books, a low-end publishing house from the 1970s that produced the Bronson books, Keller, Gannon, and other ultra-violent series titles. The anchor story is from Stephen Mertz, who talks about his experience with Manor Books and when he was just getting started as an author, and they tried to rip him off financially. Justin also does a nice book-by-book recap of Manor Books' greatest hits. At some point, Eric, you and I need to do a feature on Manor Books because they occupy a special place in the history of violent and exploitive paperback original crime fiction. There's also an article in here, it's such a good issue, by Paul Bishop on the Black Eagles series from Zebra Books. There's an article on Peter McCurtain's Soldier of Fortune series that actually thanks Paperback Warrior for the work we've done in unmasking the authors behind the books. There's a long interview with Lee Goldberg about what he's doing with his two reprint houses, Brash Books and Cutting Edge Press. He also mentions us in his interview, which is very nice and generous of him. There's also a preview of something that Bob Dice has in the works that I believe just came out called Men's Adventure Quarterly, where he's curating and reprinting the best stories and art from the men's adventure magazines for modern readers today. I think Bill Cunningham is also involved with the publication, and so I've seen some PDF mock-ups of it, and my copy's on the way. It just looks beautiful. That's Men's Adventure Quarterly. If you type that into Amazon, you can order the first issue, which I believe is all Western stories. Anyway, Justin's magazine also has an article on the Malco series, some combat fiction reviews, some Donald Westlake reviews. It's really great. So you can order this all-color Men of Violence issue from Amazon, and thanks to Justin for putting this out, even if I had to buy it myself. In other news, Eric, what do you know about an author named Richard Neely?
I kneel before you and say I know nothing of that name.
Okay, good. Let me show you these. Let me hand this over to you. I have a couple of Richard Neely books in my library that I'm handing over to you. One is called Death to My Beloved from 1969. It has a sleazy photo cover of a naked woman murdered on a fluffy rug. It was published by Signet, which is an imprint of New American Library. It's about a San Francisco detective who teams up with a Park Avenue psychiatrist to catch a psychotic killer, leaving a trail of dead bodies across America. The other one I handed you is called The Smith Conspiracy from 1972, also with a crappy photo cover from Signet. This one's about a right-wing billionaire seeking to start a race war by brainwashing an unstable Vietnam vet into assassinating a black leader. What do you think about those covers on those books? When you see covers like that, does it draw you in or repulse you?
The Smith Conspiracy repulses me. It's just not a very good cover. Death to My Beloved I would probably buy if I saw it.
Okay. I would and did buy both
Yes.
only because they're the right length and era to me. This author, Richard Neely, he lived from 1916 to 1999. He was a newspaper reporter in New York who went into advertising and worked for many of the big firms. Eventually, he moved to California and took up writing full-time, with his first 3 novels released by Ace Books in the 1960s. He wrote only 15 novels in his entire career, but 3 of them became movies. Now, the reason I'm bringing up Richard Neely in the first place is because Starkhouse is, this very week, re-releasing 2 of his out-of-print books this week in one attractive volume. The first book is called The Plastic Nightmare from 1969. It's about a dude who comes out of a coma after a bad car accident. While he was under, the docs performed plastic surgery on him, and he also has amnesia. So none of the facts of his life sound familiar to him. He's got a glamorous wife and a powerful job as a stockbroker. Basically, he needs to investigate his own past and how this car accident happened, which may have been a murder attempt. The Plastic Nightmare was actually adapted into a movie called Shattered in 1999, starring Tom Berenger. Have you seen that movie?
I remember watching that one back in the day on Showtime. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember liking it.
Yeah, I've not seen it. And I'm actually reading the book right now. I'm halfway through it, and it's amazing. I love this book.
Okay.
And I'll be reviewing it on Paperback Warrior. But in fact, by the time this episode comes out, my review may actually have already posted. The second Richard Neely book is also from 1969, and it's called When Love Lay Sleeping. The original book has an illustration of a shirtless Steve Holland talking to a woman in a see-through nightie. It's about a guy whose wife committed suicide 20 years ago when he was away fighting in World War II. He's cleaning his home and he finds a letter that she wrote him but never mailed to him 20 years earlier that calls into question whether she actually killed herself or was possibly murdered. So he's got to solve this kind of buried secrets mystery of a murder that may have happened 20 years earlier. Anyway, both of these books look great. I can definitely endorse The Plastic Nightmare because I'm reading that now, and I can sort of see where the ending's coming, but I want to figure out how they get there. Anyway, the books The Plastic Nightmare and When Love Lay Sleeping, both by Richard Neely, compiled into one volume by Starkhouse Books, available for purchase at Amazon or directly from the Starkhouse website. And let me show you this. So take a look at the cover on what they did here. This cover, describe the cover really quickly.
That cover I've seen before.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's also the same cover used by the Donald Hamilton book Nightwalker, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago in their original publication. So Starkhouse borrowed the art for that, and they're keeping that art alive, so good for them.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's enough odds and ends from me. Why don't you play some music, and let's do a feature.
Today's feature is on author Edward S. Ahrens. Well, he's mostly known for his Assignment series, starring CIA agent Sam Durrell. This feature will hopefully showcase not only that series, but also the many crime noir, mystery, and espionage works that Ahrens wrote in addition to his Assignment series. Our feature begins in 1916 with Edward Sidney Ahrens being born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He attended Columbia University, like last week's featured author Norman Daniels, and he gained degrees in both literature and history. At the young age of 17, Ahrens had his hands in writing short stories while also working through college as a newspaper reporter and a fisherman. This experience probably lends itself to his crime noir novels, which typically feature reporters and/or fishing towns in the Northeast. By the end of the 1930s, Ahrens had 3 full-length novels written: Death in a Lighthouse, also called Cal of Doom, Murder Money, which was also called 1 Million in Corpses, and The Corpse Hangs High. These novels were authored under the name Edward Rons, and all 3 of these books were published by Phoenix Press, a rather low-end publisher that had a penchant for paying very little in royalties. Lots of authors got their start with Phoenix Press, including Manny Ling Stokes. Unlike most of the mid-20th century authors, Ahrens served in World War II. He was part of the U.S. Navy between 1941 and 1945, and he reached the rank of Chief Petty Officer. It was during this time in the military that Ahrens really cranked up the action by writing lots of short stories for the pulps. He was featured in the late 1930s and 1940s in the pulps like Thrilling Detective, Angel Detective, Detective Story Magazine, Complete Detective, Clues Detective Stories, G-Men Detective, and so forth. According to Crime Mystery and Gangster Fiction Magazine Index, I found 92 short stories listed from the 30s through the 50s under the name Edward Rons. Needless to say, by the time Ahrens was discharged from the Navy in 1945, he transitioned right into full-time writing. In 1947, his hardcover, Terror in the Town, was published. I had the opportunity to review it for the blog and thought it was an average crime noir. It's set in a sleepy seaside town in the northeastern U.S. The town has its terror to contend with, which is a strangler on the loose knocking off its citizens. One of the main characters is Verity, who's new to the town and recently married to the local newspaper owner. Early on, she learns that an escaped inmate from the local asylum may be on the loose and the killer behind the most recent murders. As the book plods along, more murders occur and Verity begins suspecting her own husband as the killer. What I really liked about it was the setting and atmosphere. The idea of a killer preying on a small town should have been a bit more exciting, but the real highlight was just Ahrens' descriptive overtones. Because of the atmosphere, the book would even be marketed in the 70s as one of those gothic novels with the woman running from the seaside house. In 1947 and 1948, Ahrens wrote 2 novels starring Jerry Benedict, a newspaper cartoonist who functions as a private eye. The first one was called Lady, the Guy is Dead, which would also be more popularly printed as No Place to Live. The second book was called Gift of Death, and I had the opportunity to review that one as well. In it, Benedict's newspaper editor has been summoned back to rural Connecticut to inherit his uncle's fortune. This fortune is split up between him and his cousins. Unfortunately, a killer is on the loose and begins killing off the family members one by one. Like Terror in the Town, Ahrens is almost in horror mode here by using moonlit graves, dark cornfields, and this weird menace-styled subplot involving an old family curse. I mostly liked it and found the story really engaging. There's a lot of characters, but with the killer on the prowl, the body count climbs, making it a more condensed plot. Also in 1948, Ahrens saw his novel Nightmare published internationally. I'm going to save that review for later if we have time. I'll present that near the end. But up until 1950, every Ahrens novel that was published used the name Edward Rons. But in 1950, Ahrens used a different name to write Dead Heat. Tom, do you have any guess as the name he used?
I feel like I should know this, but I have no clue. I'm only familiar with the pseudonym Edward Rons used by him.
Oddly, it's a name unfamiliar to me, Paul Ayres. But even more odd is that Dead Heat is actually a novel based on the radio series Casey Crime Photographer that was created by another popular mystery and crime noir author, George Harmon Cox. The main character is Jack Flashgun Casey, who's a crime photographer for the Morning Express. He basically helps solve crimes with his reporter colleague Ann Williams. Basically, it's just a private eye formula, which was later morphed into the old newshound formula, where a journalist or reporter solves crimes and aids the cops. In 1951, his novel The Net was published by Graphic, and I really like this one too. It stars a prizefighter named Barney, who receives a letter from his estranged brother to return home to the coastal town of Easterly. It's here where Barney finds that his brother's fishing company is being bullied by a wealthy man looking to buy up all the fishing competition in the area. After a couple people are murdered, Barney finds himself thrust into a murder mystery. Ahrens nicely weaves in some boxing, a love triangle, and a murder mystery, and man, I thought it was just fantastic, and it's definitely worth pursuing. Now, looking at his 1950s crime noir novels, most were published by the top fiction company at the time, Fawcett Gold Medal. They published Escape to Love, Passage to Terror, Come Back My Love, The Sinners, Cat's Paw Ordeal, The Decoy, and so forth. But at the same time, Ahrens was also being published by the higher-tiered publishers like Harlequin, Graphic, and Avon. In 1950, he had 5 novels published, 2 in 1951, 2 in 1952, 2 in 1953, and then 1 more in 1954. And I meant to look, Tom, if he had any ace doubles. I can't remember if I ever saw one.
He does. I mean, my ace doubles are all up at the top there because I like the covers. Yeah. Somewhere in there's an Edward Rons.
Yeah, okay. Tom, it's hard to believe that Ahrens had 20 novels published before he really struck gold. I mean, we've spent all this time summarizing his career from the 1930s through the mid-1950s. But, Tom, as you know, most people don't even talk about this guy before 1955. Sure, he was a published author, and he had some really high-level publishers pushing out his work. But it reminds me of like Henry Patterson writing so many novels and having them published, and then seemingly overnight becoming this household sensation of Jack Higgins. Loosely, that's kind of what happened to Edward S. Ahrens in 1955. So, Tom, why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners what happened that really turned him into a cash cow for Fawcett Gold Medal?
Yeah, his career trajectory was really similar to John D. MacDonald's. He hones his craft in the pulps, writing standalone novels until he was ready to launch a series character that really carried him financially for the rest of his career. For Ahrens, this was his Assignment series, starring CIA operative Sam Durrell, published by good old Fawcett Gold Medal. Now, the first novel, Assignment to Disaster, came out in 1955, and then the series ran for 48 installments through 1983. And there's a catch to that I'll explain later. Each book pretty much stands alone. The original printings weren't even numbered. So what can I say about the character Sam Durrell? He's a Cajun from Louisiana who left the swamps to attend Yale, where he learned several foreign languages. He served in World War II in the OSS, which is the real-life precursor to the CIA. When we meet Sam in 1955, he's an operative in the CIA's espionage division. Each book is a single assignment that Sam needs to carry out for the CIA, with his adversaries generally being the Soviets or the Chinese or one of their client states. Many of the books give you the setting in the title. You have like Assignment Bangkok, Assignment Peking, Assignment Budapest. Others are named after the sexy vixens that Sam encounters on his adventure, like Assignment Helene, Assignment Madeline, Assignment Zoraya. You get the idea. The stories are very well written in the third person. Sam's a good main character, but not really brimming with personality. After you read a few, you get the formula down. Sam meets a lot of different people trying to get his mission off the ground, and all these people join forces to get it done. As far as the quality goes, I would sandwich it between Nick Carter Killmaster and Matt Helm. It's better than Killmaster, but not as good as Helm. Edward S. Ahrens wrote the first 42 installments, and then he died in 1975. His last book was Assignment Afghan Dragon, which came out after his death in 1976. But here's where it gets weird. Also in 1976, the 43rd assignment, Assignment Sheba, was released under the byline of Will B. Ahrens. He was the brother of Edward. There were 6 assignment books under the Will Ahrens name released through 1983. There are 2 important things to know about this these last few books. The first one is that the Will Ahrens assignment books suck. Don't read them. Edward left plenty for you to read, except no substitute. The other thing to know is that Will Ahrens didn't write these books. He hired a ghostwriter named Lawrence Hall to write them. This mystery was crowdsourced and kind of solved on the Mystery File website, and you can read the sequence of edits to their article solving this mystery of authorship. In any case, I definitely think the assignment books are worth reading. Personally, I thought that Assignment Moon Girl was great, and I personally liked Assignment Bangkok because I love the country of Thailand and really never tire of reading books set there. So that's the assignment books.
Even while writing the assignment books, Ahrens was still able to sprinkle in another 10 unrelated novels through 1962. Some of these were based on screenplays like Hell to Eternity from 1960. Tom, you read that, and you had some sort of weird backstory on the book's source material. What's the deal with that one?
I'll make this quick because I've gone through this book in the past on the show. It's basically the story of the U.S. invasion of Japanese-occupied Saipan, which is an island in the Pacific, told through the eyes of a soldier named Guy, who was a real dude. It's a fictionalization of real events adapted from a screenplay, and it's great. If it's never been reprinted, the book's called Hell to Eternity by Edward S. Ahrens.
Now, Ahrens died from a heart ailment in New Milford, Connecticut in 1975 at the young age of 58. His obituary in the New York Times stated that his assignment books sold more than 23 million copies and were reprinted in 17 languages. Now, Tom, you and I, on this very show, talk about all the reprints of some of our favorite authors by publishers like Starkhouse Press, Hard Case Crime, Cutting Edge, and so forth. Why on earth don't we see any of Ahrens' work in the modern age? There's absolutely no digital presence of any kind, and these reprint publishers have not reprinted any of his stuff. So, I mean, why do you think this is?
So the only Edward Ahrens book currently in print, I'm holding this out to you, is the Art Studio Murders, under the name Edward Rons from Armchair Fiction. Everything else is out of print. Now, I've done a little investigating here, and my sources tell me that the Ahrens estate is very difficult to deal with, and they don't have a good understanding of how these reprint houses work. The family wants more money for the rights to reprint these books than the books are likely worth today. When reprint houses make a deal with a literary estate, there's usually no upfront money. The family gets the royalties based on sales on the back end. And from what I'm hearing, and I can't tell you who my sources are, that's just not good enough for the Ahrens family. So the books basically don't exist today outside of used bookstores. A couple of his books, evidently, like The Art House Murders, probably have slipped into public domain, so if someone wanted to take up that mantle, they could do so. The problem with the Ahrens family approach is the digital era. Now, at Paperback Warrior, we do not endorse book piracy, but we're also newsmen. So there are deep corners of the internet where unscrupulous readers can get their hands on bootleg digital copies of Edward Ahrens books. I only bring this up, not because I want people to do this, but to make an economics point to the Ahrens family, and I hope some of them are listening. They can have a percentage of legitimate sales or 0% of bootleg downloads. Rights holders who sit on their intellectual property are just making a foolish business decision. We're going to, in a few weeks, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Book Creations, Inc. In Lyle Kenyon Engel, but his son now owns all these books if that were released by Lyle Kenyon Engel's kind of Book Creations company, and he's making the same foolish gamble with his back library of titles. And he also gets to enjoy 0% of no sales. So I never really understood this approach. But yeah, if you want to read Edward S. Ahrens, what you should do is you should hit a used bookstore and buy his books. And the punchline here is that his family doesn't get to see a penny of that money either. But his books went through countless printings, and they're pretty easily available. So where would you, Eric, place Ahrens on the list of kind of great mid-20th century writers that we all know and love?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know if his early stuff prior to 1955 is really appreciated. I really like it, and I think Ahrens really had a knack for atmosphere. He has some of the best descriptions of settings and locale, especially with his crime fiction and murder mystery stuff. Another niche of his is that he uses a nautical flavor for most of his crime noir. Stuff like Terror in the Town, The Net, The Sinners, Come Back My Love, Nightmare, all of these books are set either in lake communities or up on the ocean or in sleepy northeastern coastal towns. I think in terms of setting an atmosphere, he is one of the best guys I've read. But in terms of quality, no, I don't put him up there with like a Harry Whittington or Charles Williams or John D. MacDonald or anything like that. A couple of weeks ago, you asked me the same thing about Day Keene, and I said he was middle of the road and is always just consistently solid. I'd say Keene is better, but Ahrens is close in terms of his crime noir. They both thrived on the formula of writing stories featuring wanted men out to prove their innocence. His spy stuff, as we mentioned earlier, is what you've had experience with. I haven't read the assignment books yet, but I want to wrap up this feature so we can move on. I want to thank these online resources for helping us with the feature. Spy Guys and Gals, MysteryFile.com, Fantastic Fiction, Stop You're Killing Me, Paperback Confidential by Brian Ritt, and the New York Times. Anything else you want to add to the feature?
No, that's it. Read Edward Ahrens. He's good, and he's an important guy, and you should know more about his work.
Perfect. Why don't you go to your review?
Okay, my review is a little mini feature and part review. The book is called Like Mink, Like Murder by Harry Whittington, and it's available as a reprint from Stark House. The story on how this book came to be is fascinating, and it's covered in an introduction to the reprint by a vintage paperback scholar named David Lawrence Wilson. Here's the sequence of events as I understand it. Harry Whittington wrote a book in 1957 called Like Mink, Like Murder, and Fawcett Gold Medal and Ace Doubles both declined to publish it. Now, he was able to sell this book to a French company who translated the book and released it as T'as des Visions. I don't speak French, which translates into You Have Visions. It did not get published in the U.S. So jump forward to 1965. Harry sends a manuscript called Sin Doll with several gratuitous sex scenes to a sleaze publishing house called Corinth, who edits the book and releases it as Passion Hangover, by the pseudonym J. X. Williams on their Leisure Books imprint. Now, another book scholar named Lynn Monroe had someone translate parts of the French books into English to verify that it is essentially the same core story as Passion Hangover. So at this point of the story I'm telling you, David Lawrence Wilson, this scholar, has a French book by Harry Whittington. He has a porno novel by Harry Whittington under a fake name. What he doesn't have, and no one has, is the original 1940s manuscript of the Harry Whittington novel, Like Mink, Like Murder. So do you know what Wilson does? He reverse engineers the book and edits it himself into something that he imagines probably resembles the original lost Harry Whittington book. Now, he's a Harry Whittington expert and feels comfortable stripping out the aftermarket porno scenes and awkward edits possibly made by the sleaze publisher's in-house editorial staff. And at the end of the day, Lawrence produces this weird Harry Whittington book that he himself has restored to something that may or may not resemble Whittington's original manuscript. And then Starkhouse published it. And then I bought it. And then I reviewed it. And here's the review. Okay. The narrator of Like Mink, Like Murder is a milkman named Sam Baynard in the town of Dexter City. Now, Sam is an ex-con whose past catches up with him when a hot babe named Elva tracks him down in Dexter City. Now, see, she and Sam were crew members working for a gangster named Kozak until Sam got nabbed robbing a jewelry store. Now, after he got busted, Sam kept his mouth shut, he served his prison time like a man, and then landed a straight job delivering milk to squares. Now, Elza is still with Kozak, and she tracks Sam down. Sam always had the hots for Elza, but he also partially blames her for his incarceration. In any case, he wants to straighten up and fly right. He wants to put this past behind him. Now, Kozak insists on Sam's help to pull off a payroll heist of the milk company that he works for. Now, Sam doesn't want to do it, but Kozak isn't the kind of mobster who takes no for an answer. So the questions that arise, will Sam succumb to the pressure to return to his life of crime? Will he finally get in Elva's britches? These are the dilemmas that he and the reader navigate over the course of this 35,000-word paperback. The writing in Like Mink, Like Murder was a bit clunky in the opening chapter, and I don't know whether to blame Whittington or Wilson for this, but things smooth out considerably thereafter and really begin to feel like a normal Harry Whittington potboiler. There's a real emotional core at the center of this novel as Sam is torn between the straight life of a milkman and the potentially lucrative life of a stick-up man. Whittington did a great job of ratcheting up that tension throughout the paperback. So the question is, where does Like Mink, Like Murder rank in the library of Whittington's work? I would say that it's solidly a better than average Whittington novel, likely due to the edits made by Wilson 50 years after the paperback's original conception. Whoever gets the credit, if you dig a tightly wound crime noir suspense novel, you are sure to enjoy this one quite a bit. It's part of a 3-pack of Whittington's lost works released by Starkhouse, and it's really a great value for your money, so I highly recommend it. You can find it on Amazon or the Starkhouse website. Again, it's called Like Mink, Like Murder by Harry Whittington.
Back to Edward S. Ahrens, I'm reviewing his 1948 novel Nightmare. It stars a World War II veteran named Neely, who's married and working in New York at a lending institution called Globe Finance. In the world of crime noir, Neely's job as a vault and payroll manager at this bank makes him the perfect fictional fall guy for a heist. Here's how it goes down. Neely, who's fairly straight-laced and doesn't drink much, decides to go out with 3 coworkers for a wild night on the town. He arrives back home in the early morning hours in a drunk stupor. There, he receives a phone call from the bank asking him to go there. When Neely arrives at the bank, he's cold-cocked from behind and rendered unconscious. When he awakens, he discovers a bloody gun in his pocket, the bank manager murdered, and $40,000 missing from the bank's vault. Like a Day Keane or a Henry Kane novel, Neely must avoid the police's manhunt while searching for the real killer to clear his name. We've all read this sort of story before, and we've talked about it on the show. It's the familiar man wakes up beside a corpse scenario. Sometimes it's a beautiful woman or a mistress or a spouse, but the story's engaging, and the characters are really good in this story. It moves pretty fast, and for an odd sense of location and setting, Ahrens presents this story in an urban setting. That's different than his books like The Net, They All Ran Away, Terror in the Town, Gift of Death, that rely on either sleepy rural farm towns or cozy fishing villages. Anyway, this one was good, and it's called Nightmare by Edward S. Aarons, and it's an enjoyable, albeit familiar story. And gosh, that's all I have, Tom.
All right, so with that, then, we can close the books on another episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. Join us next Monday for another edition, and every day at paperbackwarrior.com for new reviews of old paperbacks. Follow us on Facebook to join the conversation, and consider donating using the PayPal link on our homepage to support the show. On behalf of Eric, this is Tom saying we will see you next week.